So in this lesson, we are looking at how to present data items in a list view control, which I talked about a little bit in the lesson, right? We want to be able to present a list of items, allow the user to scroll through those items and then select one. And so the app that we're going to build is basically like a little city attractions guide. I picked out 5 places in Springfield that visitors might want to get more information about. We're going to create a list view. We're going to display those 5 items, and then when the user clicks on one, we're going to look at how do you launch the browser window and take the user to that particular URL. So I'm going to start by setting up a new project, right? Make sure I'm in my C# Windows Phone Apps, blank app. I'm going to call this Springfield City Guide. All right, and let Visual Studio set up your project. Once you have your project set up, we'll come over here to our main page XAML, right, where we can view our designer. And so the first thing I'm going to do is grab a text block so that I can have just kind of some title text at the top of the screen here. And I'm going to change this to Springfield City Guide over here in the properties. Right, this should all be familiar from the previous videos when we use this kind of control. So the control we're going to learn how to use is the list view. And the list view is a little different from list box. Now list box you may have used previously as a Windows form control, and list box in fact does exist in here. You can use it. But in order to get that vertical styled layout that is touch capable, we can scroll up and down. It looks nice. We can style it. There's lots of templates that you can use. We want to use the list view control. So we're going to grab the list view control and drop it onto our canvas here. And we want to make sure that it kind of docks and takes up the entire space. So I'm going to come in here to the layout section, and I'm going to set it so it stretches all the way across, and so it stretches up and down, but we need to set the width and the height to auto so that no matter how many items we have in there, it's going to go ahead and fill the entire screen. Let's see, I want to also give it a name. I'm going to name it Attractions List. Great. Now, I included a link in the lesson that talks about how to make list view a little nicer looking, or to change the styles. There's styles and templates and all kinds of things in here in the properties that you can use to change the way that the list view control looks. And I would recommend that you take a look at that and kind of just get an idea of some of the possibilities for this. So the next thing we're going to do is populate our list view control with our 5 places that we want to advertise. So make sure you have your list view control selected. We come over here to the properties window, and there's an items collection. And so if you click this ellipses box, you get an editor for adding items directly into the list view. Now this is just going to statically add these 5 items as clickable items in the list. If you wanted to programmatically add items to the list view, maybe as they're created or as they're imported, you can do that too. But you can see down here that the list view supports a couple of different types of items that you can put inside of it. So these could be checkboxes, they could be radio buttons, they could be regular buttons. In our case, these are going to be list view items. And so we're going to create a list view item and click add for our 5 different items. And you can see there's some different styling options and things in here. It's the content that ultimately is what's going to show up on the screen. So I'm going to start with, I pulled up my 5 links. We're going to start with the Mother's Brewing Company. So Mother's Brewing Company. And we probably want to make that a little bigger because you can see it will show up in here, but it's really tiny. So we want to come down here to the text section, and let's make that bigger. There we go, 20 looks good. All right, so once you've got your list item looking the way you want, we'll add another one. And let's see, I also want to do the 1984 arcade. So we're come down here to the content section, add in 1984 arcade, come down to text, adjust the size. All right, I'm just going to do this for each one. You can see the 5 places I've chosen here. All right, Nathaniel Green Park. And if you don't like the ones I've chosen, you can pick other ones to make a little demo. But I just wanted to pick some items around Springfield that people may be familiar with. Ask a Nosy Chocolate. If you've never been there, it's a nice place to go. They have tours. All right, and then our last one is the Hammond's Field. So once you have your items all set up in your list box, or I'm sorry, in your list view, you'll see them over here on the side. Click OK, and you'll see them all in here. And each one of these items is going to be independently clickable, and you can see that as we move our mouse over them. And if you fired this up in the emulator right now, then you would be able to see. All right, so once we have, and in this case, we have the list view all set up, let me show you how to determine which item the user has clicked on. So to do this, I'm just going to double click right here in that list view control, and it's going to take us over to the code, and we're going to get the selection changed event for our attractions list. So in order to determine which item they selected, we can get the selected item out of our list as an object. So if you were working with an object, like maybe this was a list of books or a list of movies or a list of people, and you had an actual class object behind that, you could then relate all of the properties and utilize methods of that class from the object as you pulled it in and out of this list view. So I'm just going to start with some basic error checking. I want to make sure that this event didn't fire with nothing selected. So if our attractions lists selected index, if that is not equal to -1, then I know that something has been selected. On a lot of these controls, the selected index always tells us which item was selected, and we can check for a -1. And it's this index, in fact, that we want to check and make sure that we, or that we want to use to determine which button was pushed. So I'm going to set up a basic switch statement around the selected index of our attractions list. And if it makes more sense for you to put that into an integer and then use the integer in your switch, you can do that too. But in a basic switch statement, we set up cases, and when that particular case is met, and so in this case, like if we had case 0, so if the selected index is 0, then that's the first item in the list, which is case 0. We could have case 1, right? That's the next item in the list. And so on and so forth for all 5 items that we have inside of our list. I'm trying to do some spacing here so this looks readable. So 4 cases because we have 5 items starting with 0. And so when the first item is selected, whatever is inside of this case statement is what will fire. If the second item is selected, then this item will fire, so on and so forth. And so what we want to do is when the user clicks on one of these, we want to launch the browser window and take the user to the appropriate URL. And that's why I had them all open back here in the background so I could copy and paste as we go through. But to do that and launch the browser window, in a previous lesson we talked about asynchronous controls and doing things asynchronously. And so launching the browser window requires an asynchronous call to what's called the launch URI async method. And there are many different ways that you can use this launch URI async to check for Wi-Fi, to open other apps on the phone, to launch built-in system things. Right? There's a lot of opportunity here. So in our case, we're going to use this asynchronous call to launch the browser window to a particular URL when one of these buttons is pushed. So in order to use the launch URI async, we actually need to add a using statement up here, and it's using windows.system, and that's what's going to contain the launcher class. So down here in our first case, oh, and before I forget, remember from our previous lesson, anytime we are making await-based calls and in an asynchronous method, we have to add the keyword async to the front of our method so that the compiler understands and the phone understands that this is going to be an asynchronous call. And so we use the await to denote that we are making an asynchronous await call, right? That we're going to wait for our turn and be able to run this asynchronously. So it's launcher dot launch URI async, and inside of here we have a new URI object, and that URI object is going to be in quotes the URL of where we want to send the user. And so I'm going to copy and paste this for each one of these cases, and then I'm going to go get my URLs. So looking at my form, my first one was Mother's Brewing Company, so I'm going to come over to my browser and I'm going to grab their URL and I'm going to plop it down there in the quotes. And so then I had the arcade. I'm just going to close these as I'm done with them. And then we had the park. That's a long one. Oops, wrong window. And then the chocolate factory. And then the Cardinals. And so that's it. Let me go ahead and demo this for you so you can see how it works. Now, those of you that are working on the emulator are going to find a little bit of heartburn with this application because getting internet access to your emulator so that your browser window will actually work and take you to the correct page is far more difficult than it needs to be, really. You have to allow the emulator access to your networking device that is providing internet to your computer, whether that's a wired connection or a wireless connection. You have to go into the Hyper-V Manager and you have to set that up. I'm going to provide a link for you in the lesson that shows you how to do this, but unfortunately it's just far more difficult than you would think it needs to be. So let me show you what this app now looks like. So I decided to dig out my sweet Nokia 920 for testing Windows apps. And this was actually a really great phone. I really enjoyed the 920, but the battery life is atrocious. And so that's what I ended up replacing my getting the Nexus for. But I still have this phone. It's a great phone, and it's nice to be able to have a device to test on. So we can see here's our app and it's running, our Springfield City Guide. We can see our 5 items, and when I click on these, then the browser window opens and it takes me to the correct website. And so let me go back here to our app, and then we can click on another, and we can see that the browser window opens. If I can click on it, there we go. And the browser window opens and takes us to the correct location. So that's it. That is our Windows app with how to use the ListView control and make some decisions using the switch statement and launch the browser window.